Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is our weekend edition, and we have a roundtable we have not had for some time. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford, and of course, you could also blame me a little bit because I was out part of this week. Penna, Dexter, thank you for covering the program the other day, and of course, I also want to thank Nick Pitts as well as Debbie Georgiadis, but it has been rare in which we've had Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford, and Kerby Anderson in the same studio, so I am looking forward to this. And we have lots to talk about. The NRA convention is here in Dallas. We'll talk about that. We also have some very interesting questions surfacing about how is it that a Plano teenager had a ISIS-inspired plot to actually do shooting and a number of other things in a nearby mall, and a couple of other religious liberty cases that I think also impinge upon what happens here in Dallas. So, Penna, in this first hour, we've got a lot to cover.
Yeah, first the good news. Unemployment fell to 3.9%, and that is the lowest rate since 2000.
164,000 jobs created in April. And like you said, you have to go all the way back to the year 2000 to find unemployment at that low a level. We'll a little bit later, of course, talk about the campaigns and the elections, but some people are saying, Kelly Shackelford, that looks better for the Republicans and better for anybody that Donald Trump endorses because, as they've always said, it's the economy, stupid.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Trump being at 51% approval rating, and you go, with everything that's been poured out at him,
Yes.
and all the bad news and all this, and yet he's going up, 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 and you think that probably has something to do with those unemployment numbers and the fact that the tax cuts, that people have more money in their pocket, and they're like, well, hey, things seem to be going pretty well, so I think I'm a little more approving of the president. They don't seem to care about a lot of this other stuff that's happening.
Well, the Christians, the evangelicals are criticized for supporting the president, sometimes saying we're hypocritical and all of that. But, he keeps doing things in the religious liberty arena and in the faith-based arena that they've been a long time coming, some of them. So yesterday on the National Day of Prayer, he again did establish a new department in the White House and, to benefit faith-based groups, give them an equal playing field and funding for different poverty initiatives, things like that, watching out more for religious liberty. So, it's no wonder. I think people look past some of the personal things that happened a long time ago, and they look forward and they see what's actually taking place on the ground, and so they're happy with it.
It's kind of like, it's kind of like your surgeon, right? I think people would like to have, they look at the surgeon, they go, was he a moral, upstanding person? You hope they are. But once the surgery starts and everything, you're like, I just hope they're a really good surgeon. And I think people look at the president now and they just go, well, things are doing pretty well for me. And so it's kind of, that's their focus now instead of the sort of the moral issues or whatever about his character or those things. Because obviously, I think these stories hit, like Stormy Daniels and all these things. And I think people, it's like, well, that's nothing new. They already knew these types of things. It doesn't surprise them. It doesn't change their image. And so I think they've kind of almost they're focused just on their own circumstances at this point.
And again, I think you can hold to two things simultaneously. I saw a tweet yesterday of Eric Metaxas, who we hold now, and he's holding up a pen that came from the signature, and he was joking about the fact that I got a pen, and Greg Glory's upset that he didn't get one. So on the one hand, he was there at that event with Donald Trump, but then later was doing an interview on virtue, and certainly calling for that. So I think you can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can say that, I'm not necessarily thrilled about what the president is doing and has done in his past. Maybe he isn't either, but also can't let that crowd out all the positive things that are happening right now when he's president of the United States.
That's absolutely right. I love it when you can be very proud of the character of the president. We don't have that luxury right now. And so what we'd have to do is work for the things that would be best for the nation and kind of put our nose to the grindstone and do that. And I've said that ever since the campaign. I think that it's paying off for the country as a whole.
Yes. Well, and Mike Pence, I think I could feel good about him, can't we?
Absolutely.
And although he was made fun of for some of the things that he's done, which now in hindsight seem like a good idea, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's amazing the abuse and the attacks that he's gone under for doing really nothing except holding to traditional biblical beliefs. And he's just, the hatred that goes his direction is pretty amazing. When he's about as nice a guy as you'll ever meet. The only criticism they really have of him is that he's a little boring, And,
I'll take boring
I know.
after some of the other things we've been through, right?
Exactly right.
Well, again, we have the president and the vice president today at the NRA convention in Dallas. And as the Wall Street Journal has pointed out, as USA Today points out, this has become kind of ground zero for some of the protests, too, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. There's 80,000 attendees to the NRA convention. As I was driving here, I was hearing on the news that people were actually waiting for the president to come and speak. And we all know what that's about. When you're at a convention and the president is coming, you've got to wait like hours and be secure. And they even all had to give up their guns for him to come. And certainly we're not surprised at the protesting that's taking place. I'm sure the security is absolutely unbelievable, ironclad.
A number of years ago, well, it's more than just a number of years ago, 1964, they had the Republican convention. Remember all the security that they had there? They had an individual burning a flag, and I had a chance to watch that. And that case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and Justice Scalia voted in a way that his wife didn't appreciate. I remember that funny story. But nevertheless, I remember the security there, and I suspect it's like that as well. I'm going to try to go down to it tomorrow because I am an NRA member and want to walk through the exhibit hall. They say it's 15 acres of exhibits. I'm going to put my walking shoes on. I think it's going to take a long time to go through all that.
That's amazing. And you can't think of a lot of different things that both the president and the vice president would go and speak to.
Yes.
So it is very unusual. And if you remember, there was a lot of talk after the Parkland shooting. The president was taking some positions that the NRA didn't like,
yes.
That he might be okay with, an age limitation like 21 or something. And that's not the NRA's position. They're like, oh, he's breaking away with the NRA, like, they're not friends anymore. And no, the fact that the president and the vice president are both attending the convention, I think not only speaks to their relationship, but I think also speaks to the fact that this is still an issue for politicians, that is a winning issue for people who are in favor of Second Amendment rights, all that flyover country, all those people who own their own weapons for self-defense. It's still more powerful than the sort of the left-wing, take their guns approach. And so I think obviously on the political side, it's still probably smarter to be with the NRA rather than anti-NRA.
Well, again, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, if you have any comments about the NRA convention or any of the other topics we're going to address, we'd love to hear your comments. And again, we also broadcast this on Facebook Live, so if you want to leave some comments there about the National Rifle Association. Also going to talk about this Plano teen that was arrested in an ISIS-inspired plot to commit a shooting at Frisco's Stonebriar Mall. We're going to get into some of these religious liberty cases, and we have a lot to cover, and we will do so right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Economist Thomas Sowell filed his last column a little over a week ago. At the age of 86, he certainly has earned his retirement. We'll miss his insight, but benefit from his books and columns he has written over the years. One of his last few columns had the engaging title, Football and Fallacies. As is so often the case, he takes on one of the fallacies of the liberal left. He talks about the reaction from players in the NFL when a black punter took the field. One of the defenders cried, "Fake." His reaction was understandable since you never see a black kicker in the NFL. So Thomas Sowell put it this way: I've seen hundreds of black players score touchdowns, but not one kick a point afterwards. I've seen a black president of the United States before I've even seen a black kicker in the NFL. The point he is making is that politicians and judges have always assumed that statistical differences between racial groups indicate discrimination. If so, does that mean there is discrimination among kickers in professional football? Of course, we all know the answer to that question. Owners and coaches will pick the best player regardless of their ethnic background. In fact, they'll even take a foreign player who cannot even speak English if they can kick a football. The lesson here is that we have been told for decades that statistical differences are automatically a reason to suspect discrimination, whether between races or sexes. He goes on to remind us that some of the differences, for example, in wages between men and women have more to do with their different career choices. So let's be honest. Some statistical differences do point to discrimination, either overt or subtle, but in most cases, the differences are due to other factors that have nothing to do with discrimination. This is a lesson I hope politicians and judges can learn from this football story. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me also mention that you can leave a message on our Facebook Live post, and we'll read those a little bit later. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford in studio. And again, I thought we'd just do some of the sort of Dallas-oriented programming first, and then we'll get into some of the other national news. And I wasn't here this week, but I heard about this Plano teen who was arrested, and this is an ISIS-inspired plot. Now, he was arrested in a place not far from where you live. Almost all of us, I think all three of us around the table, have been to Stonebriar Mall many times. So this one really hit home in ways that nothing has since the time in which we had those two ISIS-inspired individuals try to kill people in Garland.
Yeah.
But this was really close to home. What do we know about this, Penna?
Well, we know that he is 17 years old, and he was preparing for a mass shooting. And this year, I mean, the feds had been looking at him for a long time and watching this. He was actually communicating with some, and his information was flowing to them. He was trying to recruit others to join him. He never was successful in recruiting anyone, but he did make himself shown. So they watched him. And then this sometime here in 2018, he exposed the target, which was Stonebriar Mall, and he both wanted to shoot and set fires in stores. And he was planning, and he exposed the time, which was during Ramadan.
Right,
and his statement was that so he would kill fewer Muslims.
Right, because they wouldn't be out.
They wouldn't be out. They're fasting. They're not going to be out shopping and eating and things like that. So he had spent at least $1,400 already to get weaponry and tactical gear. One of the statements he made was he was sort of thinking maybe it should be later after he was 18 because he could buy some heavier weapons. But the FBI went ahead and arrested him, actually picked him up at his high school. I mean, to me, it's just, it's devastating that it's a high school kid that's already so radicalized. He did, so ISIS was his inspiration. And, I'm glad our authorities are on this, but, it's scary. It's very scary. I'm glad there's social media, too, because they sometimes talk about these things and get caught.
I think a few things, jumped out at me at this. One was the fact that he's not from a radicalized family. No. He so it sort of tells everybody that anybody's, a child could go this direction if you're, and go on the internet and do all these other things. The other thing that was really encouraging to me was the Muslim community coming out strongly and publicly against him.
That was good, yeah.
I think that's something that doesn't happen a lot because of the fear of being targeted. Right. But I think Dallas has a pretty significant Muslim community that does stand up and say, we don't agree with this. And I think that's important. And I think that needs to be seen more. I think the Christian community needs to see that more. I think it would make people less, fearful of people when really they're probably, your friends on these things, and people are fearful because they don't know. So I think that would really help. But the other thing that caught my attention is I think the first part of his plan is to go in and just murder the police officer.
Right. Those that are easily identifiable. Yeah.
And so I think that, again, we need to lift up our police.
Yeah.
Not only because they were just going to be, think of the guy goes to work in the mall and he's just murdered for no reason. This is the way our police right now are having to live. And again, thank God for the officers, the, law enforcement who caught this guy before any of this happened.
Yeah. And you point out something I do in my latest book here, and that is the need for the reformers in Islam to speak out. And we do have some of those, and we've interviewed a few of those on the program because, after all, that's one thing we need. And back to this idea that it doesn't necessarily follow that because even the parents are radical that the young people are, or vice versa.
Right.
And this one I think is kind of intriguing. But even something else I point out in the book, a lot of times people say, well, how significant is and how extensive is that? Well, the first thing you can point out is even if you accept the idea that most Muslims are not that way, say even 99% aren't, it's only 1%, you have 4 million in this country. You can do the math, and you come up with about 4,000 people that Homeland Security has to pay attention to. So you can start recognizing very quickly that whether it's 1% or 1/10 of 1%, whether it's 40,000, 4,000, whatever, we're talking about just enormous numbers because we have a lot of Muslims in this country. And here, this individual maybe showed some signs, but as we said, came from a family that didn't necessarily show those signs. So It's the tough work of people in Homeland Security, FBI, and others to try to dig some of this out.
Yeah, we've actually have a situation we've been dealing with. It's not public really yet, very much or yet, but I just think it's sad. We're representing. There's a Muslim. They just simply want their own cemetery.
Oh yes,
and they're being harassed because people. Oh, we don't want any Muslim cemetery in our city. It's like, can't they bury their dead?
Mm-hmm.
I just think that you have to realize that there are. Obviously fundamentalist Islamic, terrorist, ISIS and et cetera. But there are also a lot of people who don't hold to that at all. And I think all you do is almost create more of it when you act right. with hostility and treat people in that type of way. You almost, sort of push people in that direction, which is a mistake.
I think, I don't know how it is in all the communities that where our stations are, where people are listening, but in the area that this young man lived in and throughout North Texas, there are many, many Muslims that live and work. I can go shopping to some of the malls around here. There's salespeople there helping you. They're in with families. You see lots of big families, people pushing strollers and wearing, the headdress. So that's where I think a lot of communities are right now. And so, yeah, I think we all have to be on guard, and I'm very glad authorities are watching over these things. But we also have to figure out a way to live with people that are different than we are. It's just a different world than our parents' world. And so I think Kelly's absolutely right. You don't want to needlessly offend people when you don't have to.
Yeah. One of the other questions I want to put on the table is why Ramadan? And, of course, one of the arguments is that there may not be Muslims out there. But when you look at it worldwide, this is a phenomenon that people have documented over the last couple of years. Gary Bowers talked about this. Jim Dennison has talked about this, and others, that sometimes the time in which there's the greatest radical Muslim attacks are usually during Ramadan. And so there is kind of this idea in the radical element of Islam. This is not all Muslims hold to this, but that indeed, if they're engaged in a jihad during Ramadan, which is the holiest month in the lunar month of the year, that indeed would be where you would get the greatest reward. So there's another kind of mindset, because on the one hand, and I wrote a commentary about that, which you can find on our website, you would think that Ramadan is a time in which you fast from food and a variety of other things. I won't go into all the details. I think most people are very aware of that. And it's a time of prayer and reflection for most Muslims. But it's also a time in which the radical element in Islam, which again is a small percentage, even as I pointed out a minute ago, nevertheless see this as the ideal time to actually bring this about. So as we enter into this month of May, we're going to have to pay more attention not only to what might be happening in this country, but as you look around the world, it is, I think, an interesting irony that during a time of Ramadan, which is supposed to be a time of peace and prayer, it's also a time of terrorist attacks.
Yeah, that's the reality we live with. A couple other interesting things about this case. He actually learned how to build a pipe bomb from stuff that was posted by Eric Harris of Columbine.
Wow.
He went back that far. And another thing, with the NRA convention here, this is interesting. He actually got this federal person that was working undercover to go into the mall with him, and he said he was under the impression that the guards there were not armed, and so that was why he chose that mall. I don't know if that's true or not. That's I think that ought to change if it is true.
Well, it's something to think about because, as we just pointed out, Kelly pointed out just a minute ago, the first thing he would do is shoot anybody who's wearing a uniform, whether they are armed or not. So it's something to think about.
He said he'd actually like to make a cop surrender and drop his gun.
Wow. Incredible story. And again, that's one I heard about even when I was out of town. And of course, you've been hearing about that here locally. Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to get into a couple of these Christian school cases. One that really reminded me a lot of one that happened here in Dallas years ago with the Livingston Christian Schools case. We have information about it on our website. Of course, we always have a link to First Liberty. All that coming up right after this.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
I'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford, Weekend Edition. One of the articles we've posted here is decision, or actually it was a decision not to decide by the Supreme Court on a case involving the Livingston Christian schools. And it reminded me of something that happened here in Dallas years ago that we got involved with and talked about. And that is at Grace Bible Church, they had a Grace Christian School. And the argument was as well, these Christian schools, we have some reservations about this because maybe parking might be an issue. Reminded me of the Orthodox synagogue or the home where they said, well, parking's an issue. And they walk to the synagogue.
Right.
And the same thing, how many people park in front of a Christian school? But nevertheless, they wanted to issue a special use permit. And everybody said, well, then you solved the problem. I said, no, you didn't, because they could give the special use permit 1 year and withdraw it the next year. And so as a result, I think a lot of us started paying attention to the issue of zoning. And I'm well aware that there's a couple of places in this country which have effectively zoned out churches. Now, talk about this particular case, Kelly, because this is the Livingston Christian Schools, and it's the whole township of Genoa. But talk about what that means, and most importantly, why you were so disturbed that the Supreme Court did not take the case.
Well, this is a Christian school that wanted to exist, and they thought maybe a natural place to exist is within the church. And so, but the city said, no, you're not allowed to exist there. And they said, okay, well, where in the city can we exist? And the answer was nowhere. That you literally had to get a special use permit in order to exist. Now, there's a Supreme Court case that says you can't have a city that has zoning laws that doesn't allow a strip club to exist somewhere. They have to have a right to exist as a matter of right somewhere, because otherwise, if it's just when you give permission, then you might not give permission. And so we're essentially like saying, we just want at least as much rights for a Christian school as a strip club has, right?
Great line.
And but in this case, we really were in a good circuit, the Sixth Circuit, and we got a really bad panel. It's just random, right? Which 3 judges of the 15 you get, and a shocking decision, ruling against the Christian school. And so we went to the Supreme Court to try to get them to take this, because you can't have this where you ban. Where there's nowhere you can exist as a matter of right, where you have to jump through all these hoops, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars proving and then hoping that they rule your way. Well, the Supreme Court denied cert, meaning they didn't take it. They didn't decide it one way or the other. They just didn't take it. So now that bad decision still remains. And part of the reason they might have done this is the city, I think, was a little concerned, and they stepped forward towards the end, and they're actually trying to work something out now where the Christian school can exist within the church. But this is dangerous. This is something that you can find in a lot of cities across the United States, where there's nowhere you can exist as a matter of right. In other words, you have to go to the city and get some approval. That's bad for a lot of reasons. Number one, obviously they might deny it, etc. Number two, a lot of those things are very costly. You need to do a study of, what kind of impact this will have to our community. And I've heard of, churches spending almost $1 million just to go through
traffic and parking and all those kinds of things.
Everything else. And so
vandalism.
So that's why to say that you can't exist anywhere as a matter of right in any zone of the city is really problematic. And it's something that the Supreme Court is eventually going to have to deal with. If people want to get information on the case, the Livingston Christian School case, you then go to firstliberty.org. I know pointofview.net has a direct link to there where they can get there as well. But you can read the briefs. You can read, all of it if you want to. But it was one we were really hoping the court would take. But, of course, they don't take most of the cases that go up. And in this case, they didn't rule either way. They just didn't take it.
I want to ask one question about it, and that is, as Kerby said at the beginning, what the logical place for the school to exist would be inside a church, and that's what they did. They went to lease space. Mm-hmm. So what was the reason? Did the court give a reason for saying, or the city give a reason for saying it couldn't be in that school?
Well, yeah. I mean, you couldn't as a matter of right, and then they wanted them to prove that it wouldn't be, they were supposed to prove that it would be a burden on them not to be able to exist, and they said they didn't meet their levels of proof that it's a burden to not be able to exist in the city limits.
That's a big burden.
And it's always the like the other case we're talking about that we'll get to here in a little bit. I mean, sometimes you can meet everything, and they just don't want you there. Cities a lot of times don't want you there because you're not paying taxes. Okay, if you're a church or a religious organization, then you're tax exempt, and they don't want that. They'd rather have taxpayer money. So there's lots of reasons why they can discriminate and do often discriminate against religious organizations, churches, Christian schools, etc. And which is why there's actually a federal law that was passed, specifically RLUIPA, to protect churches, religious organizations from this type of treatment. And it's sad, but we had to create a federal law because these zoning weapons are pretty powerful in pushing your churches, your religious schools, et cetera, out of the community.
We said years ago here on Point of View, Penna's been around a while, members, where we started saying, I think the big religious liberty cases are not going to be prayer in the schools and things like that. They're going to be zoning cases. And here's a good example. Because, again, just even if they said, well, we'll let you exist and we'll give you a special use permit, an SUP, they could withdraw it the next year. Or just imagine trying to put together a school and you don't know if you're going to be in existence the next year. This is one step further. They just simply say, we're not going to let you be here in this building, and we're not going to let you going to be in any other building inside the township.
And they think that people listening to this think, well, I'm in the Dallas area. This doesn't happen in Dallas. Oh, that's one of our cases we had to file this week. Was on behalf of a Jewish synagogue.
There you go.
Who simply wants to exist. And the city of Dallas is coming after them. They've jumped through every hoop they've asked them to jump through. There's only one hoop that they can't jump through, and it's that they don't have enough parking spaces. And again, it's an Orthodox Jewish synagogue.
They walk to the services,
and which makes the consequences of this just extremely important.
Yes.
Because if they can't meet there, then they all have to move. I mean, everybody who's a member of the synagogue has to move. So, they're literally, this is sort of and one of the things that was horrible in this whole process is somebody painted a swastika on the rabbi's car. But this is a great way to sort of get rid of the Jewish people, right? Because it's a Jewish synagogue, and they all have to move out of the neighborhood if you won't allow them to meet. And there really is no reason. The idea that they need parking spaces when they don't drive to synagogue is ridiculous. And so that's what we're left with at this point. We had to file a lawsuit because they would not agree.
Penna, you've been to Israel a couple times. You know what it's like if you get into the wrong elevator because, if you're an Orthodox Jew, you can't even push the buttons. You can't drive your car on Sabbath. And so there's one elevator that just goes to every floor and stops so that they don't have to do anything mechanically. And the same kind of thing here. Some people will say, well, why don't they just drive or why don't they just move? Well, there's this. Do you talk about putting a substantial burden on an Orthodox Jew? This is what this does, right?
Yes, I was in my daughter's neighborhood and just outside, and I saw people walking, and I realized that there was a home in that neighborhood that was a synagogue. It was the Sabbath, and they were all dressed in their Orthodox, what they wear, and they were walking there. And it was sweet. It just wasn't disrupting anyone. It wasn't causing I don't see how this would cause a problem for anyone. Maybe some neighbors are prejudiced, and that's how it started. But these are good neighbors. These are not neighbors you want to kick out of your neighborhood.
Well, and think of the where this goes. Do you have Bible studies? In the neighborhood.
We've seen those before.
And you do have cars parking there.
Yeah. That's right.
And there have been people trying to prevent that and use zoning laws and
right.
nuisance laws and noise regulations, all sorts of things. So this is why I encourage everyone to support First Liberty because they're really fighting for some of those issues. And we need to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about, let's talk about somebody's a Dallas-based individual, at least who was, James Ho. Mm-hmm. He's issued a decision. We'll get to another case that we have posted here. And this one we'll get to maybe a little bit later, Chaplain Scott Squires. That one just is amazing to me. Okay, I'm doing what is actually required by a Southern Baptist mission, by the North American Mission Board, And that is enough to get me in trouble with the military. Really? It's just, you can't make some of these cases up. So let's take a break. We'll come back and get into that. And in the next hour, we'll have a lot to cover, certainly, because we've only sort of touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of all sorts of topics to address. But first hour, doing some that have a little bit of a Dallas base. We'll come back and talk about that right after this.
GQ, once Gentleman's Quarterly, was launched in 1931 as a magazine of fashion, style, and culture. Men looked to it for advice on grooming, gadgets, and apparel. The current version delves into current events and culture, but the magazine has, perhaps, overstepped its mission statement in the April issue, with an opinion article from the publication's editors titled, 21 Books You Don't Have to Read. Number 12 on the list is the Holy Bible. GQ's editors have a strange way of backing up their condescending assessment. They write, the Holy Bible is rated very highly by all the people who supposedly live by it, but who in actuality have not read it. Those who have read it know there are some good parts, but overall it is certainly not the finest thing that man has ever produced. It is repetitive, self-contradictory, sententious, foolish, and even at times ill-intentioned. That word foolish is striking. Michael Rate at townhall.com points to a Bible verse, 1 Corinthians 1:18. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. The Bible is also rated highly by people who have read it, and who do read it, are shaped by it, inspired by it, convicted by it, comforted by it, and love it. The whole exercise by GQ in labeling the Bible and several classics as not worth your time strikes me as arrogant and certainly promotes cultural illiteracy. What the editors of GQ may not know is that the entire Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, is about Jesus Christ. Evangelist Franklin Graham suggests on Facebook that they read it again, because one day every knee will bow and every tongue confess that he is Lord. Lots of Christians agree with a guy named Brian Houston who tweeted that the Bible is way more hip than GQ. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we've got just a few more minutes before we are at top of the hour. We'll get back into some other issues. But one of the articles that I thought would be fun to just mention for a minute, Trump-appointed judge delivers fantastic campaign finance opinion in first ruling. That's in the Washington Examiner. The Slate had a different take on that, didn't they, Kelly?
Yes, they did.
Nevertheless, this is an individual we've mentioned on this program before, Judge James C. Ho, and now, of course, he is in the United States Circuit Court of Appeals, Fifth Circuit Court. Individual that has kind of a Dallas base. That's why I thought it'd be kind of fun. But right out of the box, I mean, he's the rookie, right? He's the low man on the totem pole. He's the guy that probably has to open and close the doors. He probably has to clean up the coffee cups. I don't know what they have to do there in the Fifth Circuit, but we know sometimes some of the traditions they have in the Supreme Court. And yet, his first judicial opinion, it's a barn burner, isn't it?
It is. It's, look, this Judge Jim Ho is very bright, clerk for Justice Thomas on the Supreme Court, young, going to be on the court for a long time.
Yes.
And, look, he was a very active volunteer attorney with First Liberty Institute. So we know the quality of his work, his commitment to the Constitution, and we, certainly did everything in our power to make sure that he was chosen. And I thought he was a great choice, and he's already proving it immediately. The first opinion he writes has caught the attention of this article, which says, "Wow, this is great," and I think it says, "This is a career to watch," or something like that at the end of this article. And then an article,
fun career to watch,
an article in Slate.com, which is a very liberal publication. And what I loved is the very first part of his opinion is, I think Penna off the air mentioned it, but it's basically that people in there's a problem in constitutional jurisprudence that people are making up laws and rights that aren't in there. Meanwhile, they're refusing to protect the ones that are. Well, Slate.com just goes apoplectic over this. They said, he just said he's not for Roe v. Wade and he's not for same-sex marriage. And I'm sitting there going, it's interesting that they're admitting that these things aren't in the Constitution because he didn't say anything about those things, but they took that statement and went to that. But that's exactly the type of judge that I think most Americans want.
Right.
Not one who's bringing his own baggage and trying to make up rights and things that aren't there, but wants to actually follow the law, follow the Constitution, protect the rights that are specifically enumerated.
And again, this has to do with a limit that Austin, Texas, in its inscrutable wisdom, felt that it needed to place on political contributions. But that quote, Penna, I think is pretty interesting because basically he's saying it's the unfortunate trend in modern constitutionalism not only to create rights that appear nowhere in the Constitution, but also to disfavor rights explicitly enumerated by the founders. I like that guy.
Yeah, I like him. And this was in a dissent. They ruled a different way.
Yes.
But the article goes on to say, and it's by Bradley Smith, who is someone we know. I think he used to be on the Federal Election Commission.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so he says that typically new federal judges ease into the position. They're not quite so outspoken in their dissent. So this bodes well for what we'll see coming out in the opinions of Judge Ho.
And again, I get this question sometimes, Kelly, from people saying, well, okay, are the people that President Trump are putting on the court, are these the kind of people that we would agree with? And I always take them back to the fact that unlike some of the other individuals that maybe you voted for, I was in Florida this last week and I said this to some people, and you've probably voted for people like Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush. But the point is that oftentimes Ronald Reagan would defer to James Baker and put one of his buddies on there. Mm-hmm. George W. Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, they would put one of their buddies on there. Donald Trump really doesn't know those individuals, so instead he defers to like the Federalist Society, the Heritage Foundation. These are our kind of people, and in some respects, these are better than some of the people that were put forward. Anybody remember Harriet Myers? They're just examples of individuals that are making their way into the court are the kind of people we've always wanted to be on the court.
Yeah, we've been very involved at First Liberty Institute in trying to make sure we get good judges, and that's because we've got a really different situation here. It's not the politics of usual. It's not, well, so-and-so really gave a lot to your campaign, and his brother would be a great choice for the court. Trump doesn't really have all that what's the word I'm looking for?
Like
is
the
not
crony friends in government.
He's not carrying any of that baggage. Yeah. He kind of arrived on his own, and he made a promise to the base, and he's very transactional, and he realizes that this is really important to a lot of people that supported me, and so I'm going to make sure this gets done right, so I'm going to farm it out to the experts. And so I've been on a number of committees and voted on a number of these judges to recommend. And I'm telling you, the people we're getting on the courts right now are just, I think the typical point of view listener would just be thrilled beyond belief at the quality of these people. These are people who are brilliant.
Went to Stanford, Chicago.
Yeah. Jim Ho's a great example.
Yeah.
people who have given their time, like, I mean, Jim Ho, if I had to ask how much did he give for religious liberty cases in the last 10 years? I don't know, $500,000 of his time he gave because he cares about freedoms. And he's the type that, as he says right out in his opinion, he doesn't want to be a legislator. He's a judge. He's a judge. He's supposed to put his beliefs aside, and he's supposed to just follow what the law says and not make things up and sort of insert them into the law as new rights that he's found. He's exactly the type of judge we're looking for, and I think people would be thrilled if they knew all of the people who are either on the court or waiting for that vote. The big problem right now is getting that vote.
Yes, there we go.
There's a delay going on by the Senate that is really unprecedented.
The 30-hour rule?
The 30-hour rule they're using the way you can do it is on the president's appointments, whether it's, to a cabinet level or a judge or whatever that requires advice and consent by the Senate. They had a rule that was there to say, if you have a problem with somebody, we'll let you do a 30-hour rule where we have to debate this and we give it time so that we can work this out. Well, they've now abused that into just doing it on every single person as a way to slow everything down. And so the president has less of his nominees into office, which is really bad. I mean, we're a year and a half in now, and he can't even get all of his cabinet people, all of these different positions in order, and certainly not the judges. And so he can't do his job. So this is really something that needs to be changed. But on judges, they're doing that especially. There are about 70 judges waiting to be voted on. I mean,
so they're leaving all these liberals on the court as long as they can.
Yeah, and these great, there's really excellent people are waiting. All they need is a vote, and when they get the vote, they'll get through because it's majority vote. There was rumor this week that, and McConnell has spoken out a couple of times. Seems like this rumor is true. That they were going to either they were 1 or 2 votes away from getting rid of the 30-hour rule. It just takes a majority vote. So all they need is Republicans, but you know how hard that is. And if they didn't do that, then there was going to be an agreement. In other words, the Democrats realize they're close to getting rid of the rule, so they're going to say, all right, hey, since you're close, don't get rid of the rule. We'll let you vote on 50. We'll move the non-controversial 50 of them or so through, or however many. And they were going to really start to see some movement. I still think that's going to happen, but that's really important because these judges need to all be voted on. They need to be on the bench because, the Senate could change at the end of the year.
There have been unanimous votes on judges following the 30-hour debate requirement. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, certainly is. Got a lot more to cover. We will do that. Take a break, and we'll be back right after these important messages.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you've been doing I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us today. It is May 4th, which many people call Star Wars. May the 4th be with you, so we'll have to at least mention that today. The NRA convention just down the road from us here in Dallas. We might mention that a little bit later. Of course, yesterday was the National Day of Prayer, and President Trump actually signed something that will be very significant. We're going to look at a couple of these religious liberty cases. As a matter of fact, one of the articles we've posted here by George Yancey, Professor George Yancey has been on the program with us before, Support for Sexual Minorities. Part of it comes from hostility towards Christianity. Not a real surprise there. One piece by David French we've posted as well on the Democrats' God Gap. And, of course, we had the White House Correspondents' Dinner, so I have a piece here by Cal Thomas, and I'm sure we'll get some comments around the table on that. Penna Dexter's done a commentary on, of course, GQ. Oh, don't you love those people? The Bible is boring and irrelevant, misunderstood, under assault, and all of that. And if we have enough time, we'll get into Benjamin Netanyahu thinks Iranians were lying during the Iran deal. Boy, you could knock me over with that one. And all sorts of other issues that we will do our best to try to cover. Penna Dexter, if nothing else, first story coming out today, unemployment. Where are we on that?
3.9%, the first time since the year 2000. So it's pretty good economic news, I would say. And you know what that does is wages have not risen as fast as, we would have thought perhaps after this tax cut, but there hasn't been a whole lot of time. But this low unemployment rate pretty much assures that wages will also increase over time.
People seem to be very encouraged about the economy and about the president, Kelly, which you would not have guessed given all of the negative news we've heard over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, you can look at it a number of different ways, but the president is now at a 51% approval rating, which I don't think anybody thought was possible again. And he is. And this is at the same time that everything is like, the Stormy Daniels and all these different things are hitting him. The media seem to have a different attack every day and seem to be, you would think, oh, boy, that's, that doesn't look so good. Meanwhile, his poll numbers are going up. And I think, number one, that's because people are going, unemployment's way down. I've got more of my money in my pocket now because of the tax cuts. People like what's happening. I think maybe part of it is, I think when you attack somebody every day, and it's almost like there's something new every day, eventually
Seems to be.
You just turn it off. I mean, you just are like, okay, whatever. And how am I doing? And I think that's kind of what America's doing. I think it's sort of, they're a little weary of all the media attacks on the president. And like if Stormy Daniels' story comes up, that most people go, doesn't surprise me, doesn't really change anything.
Yeah.
It's kind of how I saw him anyway. How's the economy doing? How's my job? How is our country doing in foreign policy? And they move on. And so despite the greatest attempts with all these different attacks, the approval rating has gone up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and among evangelicals, it's interesting because you mentioned yesterday was the National Day of Prayer. I've got a piece here.
Good.
There's prayer on a regular basis in this White House. This is what Mike Pence, Vice President, says. And, you think of some of the things that this administration has done that please Christians, that make them happy. I mean, for instance, yesterday there was a new executive order on creating an Office of Faith-Based Initiatives, and there will be a lot of sort of attention paid to equal funding for Christian groups to take care of poverty and other things like that. There was an executive order on religious freedom just a year ago announced, and that's been having its effect. And then evangelical Christians have, this article says, unprecedented direct access with the current president. You saw them together with the president yesterday signing this particular order. And then they are, one of the prayer targets that's taking place in the White House is praying for Jerusalem. And also they're making their plans to open the embassy in Tel Aviv. Now we're hearing a lot about the Iran agreement, which certainly helps Israel if we back out of that agreement. We're being urged to do so by Netanyahu. And then just the sort of what's happened after this White House Correspondents' Dinner and how, there's sort of been an backlash against the horrible speaker there. And I don't know, just a lot of ways in which this White House is pleasing the evangelical community, even though, there are things about certainly the president's personal life that are perhaps distasteful to some degree, but people are looking at what's being done and they're excited about it.
Again, if you had said 2 years ago that not only would this individual be the president, but that prayer would be something that happened at every cabinet meeting, that'd be a little bit odd. And if you had told me that he would go and speak as he is in just a few hours, maybe he's just done it, at the National Rifle Association convention in Dallas. Now, I'm not surprised that Vice President Mike Pence is there. But given where Donald Trump was, Kelly, not so long ago, it's amazing that he went to speak to the NRA, especially since I think some presidents right now might say, well, that's just a lightning rod. That's some convention I can probably avoid.
Yeah, I mean, number one, this president has always been a big NRA backer. And I think everybody knew that before the election. But then after Parkland, you had the president kind of doing what he does. He sort of negotiates and kind of moves back and forth. Right, and so he actually proposed some things or said he was agreeable to some things that the NRA was not with regard to gun laws. For instance, I think the main one would be maybe prohibiting sales of guns until you're 21 or whatever. Well, the NRA didn't back that. And so the articles were, he's fracturing from the NRA. He's, nope. I mean, unusual, but both the president and the vice president are speaking at the NRA convention. I mean, I can't think of the president and the vice president speaking at anything, but I do think it speaks also a little bit to politics because there's this sort of battle going on now. And the idea of many was, well, if you can tie a politician to the NRA, you can sink their ship. I've never seen that really work. And
I've seen the reverse work sometimes.
That's exactly right. And I think the fact that the president and the vice president are going there is a testament also. I mean, they both are just, as a matter of principle, backers of the right, the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, the right for self-defense. But I also think on the political side, it shows that that they understand something, that, flyover country, that most people in this country are sympathetic to the right to own a firearm, that actually being connected to the NRA will end up politically being more favorable rather than less favorable. And I think, they realize the politics of this, in addition to the fact that these are guys who have always been, that's just their belief. That's been their personal belief. I think on the political side, you wouldn't have the president and the vice president showing up to something if it was going to politically be harmful. So I think that speaks something to every politician.
That is amazing.
Of the danger of going the other direction.
When's the last time you had a president or vice president speak at any convention, much less the NRA convention? And so we've heard somebody in the past talk about clinging to God and guns. And
Who was that?
When we come back, I want to get into this piece by David French for just a minute. It's called The Democrats' God Gap, because it's a gap not only between Democrats and Republicans, but between whites and blacks, and black evangelicals, white evangelicals. It's a fascinating study. It's one of the articles we've posted. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Economist Thomas Sowell filed his last column a little over a week ago. At the age of 86, he certainly has earned his retirement. We'll miss his insight, but benefit from his books and columns he has written over the years. One of his last few columns had the engaging title, Football and Fallacies. As is so often the case, he takes on one of the fallacies of the liberal left. He talks about the reaction from players in the NFL when a black punter took the field. One of the defenders cried, "Fake." His reaction was understandable since you never see a black kicker in the NFL. So Thomas Sowell put it this way: I've seen hundreds of black players score touchdowns, but not one kick a point afterwards. I've seen a black president of the United States before I've even seen a black kicker in the NFL. The point he is making is that politicians and judges have always assumed that statistical differences between racial groups indicate discrimination. If so, does that mean there is discrimination among kickers in professional football? Of course, we all know the answer to that question. Owners and coaches will pick the best player regardless of their ethnic background. In fact, they'll even take a foreign player who cannot even speak English if they can kick a football. The lesson here is that we have been told for decades that statistical differences are automatically a reason to suspect discrimination, whether between races or sexes. He goes on to remind us that some of the differences, for example, in wages between men and women have more to do with their different career choices. So let's be honest. Some statistical differences do point to discrimination, either overt or subtle, but in most cases, the differences are due to other factors that have nothing to do with discrimination. This is a lesson I hope politicians and judges can learn from this football story. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Lots of topics to cover today, and if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. First time we've had the three of us in the same room for a while, and it won't happen again anytime soon because of the busyness of each one of our lives. But it is great to have everybody around the round table today. One of the articles we've posted, it is actually the first article, is by David French. He's been in the studio with us before, and he refers to it as the Democrats' God Gap. I would encourage you to print it out. It only takes you about 4 pages because the charts help clarify some of the things we're going to talk about. It's always hard to kind of get numbers in your head when you're listening, but there's a real gap between the belief in God that Republicans have compared to Democrats. But then the one that was even more intriguing is the gap in the Democrats between non-white Democrats and white Democrats. Penna, see if you can kind of sort that out for us, if you might.
I love how David French points out things that you don't think about sometimes. I mean, we have this big gap, and there is a God gap between Republicans and Democrats. He says 70% of Republicans believe in the God of the Bible, compared with 45% of Democrats. But there's an even larger God gap within the Democratic Party. And this was what was an amazing statistic. Only 32% of white Democrats believe in the God of the Bible, compared with 61% of non-white Democrats. So that's an almost 30-point gap. So people of color often, and really it was the black community that was the most religious in these statistics. I don't know that people really think about that. And so when you have the progressive white Democrats who hate Chick-fil-A, he mentions that in the article, and who, are constantly just saying Christians don't have the right to really weigh in on the public square, that is not the Democrat Party. That is just a a section of the Democrat Party, and you've got all these people that don't believe that way and that are religious. Now, they may be economic liberals because they may be in that demographic that benefits from government largesse, but they are church-going and religious people.
Yes. Well, again, just think about in this campaign for just a minute. I want to get Kelly's comments here. If, you almost every day find out of some other criticism of Chick-fil-A, that's the one we've talked about, or your commentary today about the idea that the people at GQ say you don't need to read the Bible is redundant, it's misunderstood, it's boring, it is not relevant, and you're a person who believes in God, whether a Republican or a Democrat, that doesn't necessarily resonate with some of the deeply held beliefs that you might have.
No. And I think this is an area where they're out of touch. I remember it goes back to the Democrat convention where they booed, having God. I mean, they voted it down, when this came up about having God into their platform. And which I think was really a shock to many people who were Democrat, that the people in the leadership, and at the convention were so radicalized. Yeah. This is a big issue. The thing that this highlights to me is the sadness of the Bible believing community not being able to come together somewhat. In that you have really a lot of the African American makeup of the Democratic Party really sees God the same way as many of the white evangelicals in the Republican Party, and yet you don't see a lot of sort of coming together on issues that they should be able to come together on, right, and really speak with a powerful voice. It's one of those untapped things that's waiting to be tapped. Whether it gets tapped or not, I don't know. But there really is a unity there that could occur, you would think. But people have tried and have not been successful with it.
Again, if you run a campaign that looks like it's sort of anti-God, and you see this figure here that 83% of African Americans are absolutely certain that God exists, that's really offensive to those individuals, whether it's the so-called new atheist, whether it's some that are running on the Socialist Party, whether it's Democratic candidates that say, I'm tired of these God people. All those phrases, all those comments, all those groups really would be very alienating, I would think, to the African American population.
I think so. It just depends on, I think a lot of times, because it's for your survival, the economic issues trump religion in the way you vote. And, I think that we have to make a better case that free markets, that capitalism, that work rather than welfare makes your life better, even if you're on the lower end of the living scale, that your life can be better if you kind of follow these conservative principles, and if our country does that. That's been a slower moving thing. And you have people in Christian churches that tend to be very liberal on the social issues, saying this is mean to those communities if we take away their welfare. And so we haven't made those cases well, and I think that's the divide more than anything. And a lot of times when it has to do with whether your family can eat or not, or whether you can, a lot of times you're going to vote your pocketbook before you vote your religious values. I think that's the reality.
The other thing that's interesting, and I don't know that anybody's looked at this, but President Trump actually garnered a larger percentage of the African American vote than Republicans did before him.
True.
This is despite the fact that the whole sort of, I don't want to say attack as much as, I think most people in the Democratic Party still believe this, that Trump is like part of the alt-right or something, that he's like some anti-Semitic, which is really bizarre because his son-in-law's Jewish, but that he's anti-Semitic, that he's anti-black, that he's all these things, and so despite that sort of imaging and that being a real belief, and how could we elect a racist, and them thinking he's a racist, Again, the Republican side looks at him and goes, he's not a racist. He's a lot of things, but he's not a racist. I mean, he's just kind of what it's about him, at the moment. But he's got, plenty of people of color and does business and has relationships, great relationships with the Jewish community, et cetera. Despite this image, you had a larger percentage of African Americans vote for him. And I don't know exactly why that is. I think part of it is sort of his whole pitch of, hey, what could it hurt to try something different? I'm going to try to get, the economic, the economics change for the African American community. And he's done that to some extent so far, right? Lowest black unemployment ever in the history of the country. But maybe part of it is he has a number of black preachers and others who are on his campaign that he's known for years, that vouch for him, and so maybe they tapped into a little of this I believe in God part of the Democratic Party, and that was where he picked up some of the extra votes from the African American community.
He certainly breaks a lot of our long-established divisions in the country, and some of those lines are reshaping. So, I think I could be hopeful here that maybe his administration will make a difference in these numbers, and that you'll begin to see more of the people of color, maybe often their lower income, maybe their lives will be better because they begin to participate in the real economy rather than the welfare system. That would be a great outcome of this presidency.
If you, again, 2 years ago, you had told me he was president, first of all, I'm not sure what to believe, but number two, that he would have had 2 different National Day of Prayer events at the White House, and that the previous occupant stopped doing National Day of Prayer events when he actually had been to church all those years, I would not have predicted either of those. But nevertheless, as we pointed out, yesterday was a very significant event, National Day of Prayer, but also a time in which they were handing out pens of signing the faith-based initiative, and they were handing out pens to a lot of people that have been in the studio, and actually we've had a chance to talk to.
Yeah, definitely. The things that that have been done for religious freedom are really unequaled by any president. And again, people are like, well, why is that? It's because, they say it's because those, he's just garnering votes. Well, okay. It's if he is, he's still doing those things. He still has these, the Attorney General statement that followed the executive order laying out religious freedom protections in all areas of government. Those regulations followed. The faith-based office now about to open. The justices being appointed that are very pro-religious freedom. There's a long list of these things. All the lawsuits against the HHS stopped. A new division under the HHS for health, for religious freedom and conscience protection. We could go on and on. He's done a number of things, and he's continuing to do those things.
When we come back, let's talk about whether hostility towards Christianity is part of the reason that individuals are against religious liberty and for sexual minorities, and then talk about a few of these religious liberty cases. We'll talk about it right after this.
Imagine you work where people do not share your faith, and they certainly don't agree with a Christian view of life and culture. You are surrounded by hostility every single day. How important would it be to have solid information to back you up? Jim in South Carolina listens to Point of View in the afternoons. He writes, I teach in a public secular university and enjoy actually being a voice for the biblical Christian worldview in a liberal setting. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for being bold and proclaiming truth. And Jim finishes, I pray for you daily. Jim works in hostile territory, and he prays for Point of View because Point of View is a source of truth. Please help us continue being here for Jim and everyone else. We need you to visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151 and join the Truth Team. Enable us to be here each day by giving each month. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Talked about a number of different issues already, including the Democrats' God gap, but I want to get into another article real quickly, and that kind of then will bring us into some of these religious liberty issues. And it's a piece that appeared in the Stream, and we encourage you to go there from time to time because we have various guests that are actually those who write for the Stream, stream.org. George Yancey is one of those. He is a professor at the University of North Texas, and he, over the years, has looked at anti-Christian hostility. And it is always intriguing to me because last time we had him on the program, he has said what I've heard him say in many other venues, and that is, as an African-American, he is well aware of discrimination and has sometimes faced discrimination because he's black. But he says he's faced much more discrimination because he's a Christian. And you can imagine being a tenured professor at a university, being a Christian, can really get you into some real hot water. Now, if you read the article, you'll also see that there's some posters. One of them says, "Finally, I can fire you for being a Christian." And it gets us into Aaron and Melissa Klein in Oregon. It gets us into Jack Phillips and Masterpiece Bakery and some of that. But let me just summarize it quickly, and then, Penna, I'll get your comments on it as well. He's done a lot of research, and he's used a national survey finding out why people liked or disliked sexual minorities, LGBT, basically. And he found that one of the reasons, a very significant factor, it's not the only one, but one of them, is that they dislike Christians. And so it is, I dislike Christians, so one of the ways I can get back at Christians is to support the LGBT community. Some people would have thought it was the other way around. That was sort of a byproduct, but it seems like that's partially a motivation. And George Yancey has enough research to back it up to suggest that maybe some of the reason that people are always promoting the LGBT agenda is to actually use that as a weapon against Christians.
Yeah, I would have thought it was a byproduct that you supported the rights of LGBT, and since this violates a lot of biblical principles, at least the behavior, that people would like have some sort of hostility for Christians because of that. But this is the opposite, saying, well, I don't like Christians, so I support LGBT policies or people or groups. And it's like, well, then what? I mean, then what is your reason for your hostility for Christians? That would be my question.
I'm surprised. I really am. It's just bizarre to me. I would have never guessed that people who are, pro-LGBT to the extreme, are doing it, just using it because they're anti-Christian. That's really odd to me. Yeah. If you would have said he's going to do this test and he's going to check this out, I would have said no. There are people who are uninformed and, don't have as much info or whatever, but people aren't doing it just because they want to find a stick to hit a Christian with. And I'm like, no, evidently from his studies, they're really, that's what they're doing. There's a certain percentage of people that's why they jump on, that side of the issue.
Well, again, he says, do I exaggerate, or does this explain attempts to drive Christians out of business? We've just mentioned a few of them there, Jack Phillips, Aaron and Melissa Klein, two cases that we've talked about so often, to get Christian groups kicked off campus, to use state laws to place Christian colleges on equal financial footing, to use all the public accommodation laws, Kelly, that we've talked about on this program time and time again. Those are oftentimes used to punish Christians, not Muslims, not Hindus, Buddhists, or Orthodox Jews, or anything else. It almost always is used to punish Christians. Is there something behind that?
Yeah, what's interesting is we did a video. It's on the website at firstliberty.org of the Kleins and what has the attacks that have come their way.
Chilling.
Yeah.
Some of the things they said to those people that you could never imagine somebody would say.
And if people go look at it, go look at the video. We have the quotes, the emails they've gotten, the statements, wishing their death, wishing their children's death, threatening them. All very hate-filled. And our point in the video is when the government sort of countenances this, when the government says, yes, you're bad people because you hold to these Christian beliefs, they encourage this type of attack. But, I mean, it really does sort of play out exactly what Professor Yancey is talking about. And it's a real-life example. The Kleins, a couple who just wanted to and had started their own little bakery and were doing really well. And they even had the lesbian couple. They served them. They loved them. They were fine. They just couldn't custom make a wedding cake. And even there, they were very gracious in finding them somewhere else. But as soon as that point came, it was, let's crucify this little couple and their family. And you can see the actual things said. You can, in that video at firstliberty.org, you can see, look for an Aaron and Melissa Klein. I think you see their picture, and you can see the quotes, the emails, the different things that came their direction, and that still are coming their direction as a result.
Well, and again, George Yancey talks about the same thing we've talked about here. When the law wasn't in favor of LGBT, in other words, we didn't have same-sex marriage, then it was just give us our rights. This is live and let live. You have the right to get married. We want the right to get married. The moment they received that rights, then it was used as a weapon. And that not only shows up in the article in the stream, it shows up in one of the other articles we've posted here by Chaplain Scott Squires. Because here you have a chaplain. He's with the Southern Baptist Convention. For those of you that are Southern Baptists, you know what NAM is. That's the North American Mission Board. And they have said that we, in good conscience, cannot support same-sex marriage. We'll treat everybody equally, but we're not going to necessarily do a same-sex wedding ceremony or something like that. And so what you have now is one of your very important cases about Scott Squires. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Scott's a chaplain, and the way the Army regulations read, they require that chaplains follow their endorsing agency, their denomination, essentially, and that they, and if they don't, they're actually in violation, because, that's how they get to be a chaplain, is they are a part of that endorsing agency. And they also understand that many of the endorsing agencies, denominations, say that marriage is a man and a woman. And therefore, when it comes to, for instance, marriage counseling or doing, let's say, a marriage counseling event, they could do one for, the Southern Baptist, NAM, says you can do one, but you cannot do marriage counseling for two women or two men, because it's not marriage, biblically. And so they've said, this is our denomination, this is what we believe. And the Army has said, that's right, you have to follow. They said, but, you do refer somebody, if they come, to someone else, to another chaplain who doesn't have those restrictions and who can do that. That's exactly what Scott Squires did. Somebody came, he said, my denomination and my faith won't allow me to do that, but I'll find somebody who can. And he did. And you'd think, over, right? No. Charge filed against him, and a decision in the investigation, original decision, that what he's doing is discrimination, and they admit that maybe that is in conflict with what his denomination says, but that's tough. And I'm like, no, what you're doing is in conflict with the United States Constitution, in addition to Army regulations. So, that's the funny thing about this. Chaplain Squires followed his denomination and what they told him to do, followed Army regulations and what they told him to do, and he's now being punished, or the proposal is for he to be punished. So we took his case, certainly. We think we're going to win that case, but it shows the kind of things going on. I think Franklin Graham's quote that day when this kind of broke was, since when does a chaplain not allowed to follow his own religion? It's like, is this how far we've fallen?
Yeah, chaplain.
Yeah, and so I know Al Mohler spoke on this. It's really made it around the country, but it's an important case.
It is.
For all of our chaplains, and I think it's one we're going to win. Again, The Constitution's on our side, his denomination's on our side, and even Army regulations are on our side.
I'm so glad you're in the battle for religious liberty within the military. I know that you just won some rights for a similar case with Sergeant Bohannon.
Yeah, Leland Bohannon.
Yeah, so that bodes well for this, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, that was a really a tougher one because you had the Air Force, trying to punish this guy who was about to be a general. And we had to go all the way on appeal. I mean, it was reversed because the Secretary of the Air Force came out and reversed it after the appeal. So that was, definitely a difficult uphill battle. But Colonel Bohannon is exactly the type of people we want in our military, and we don't want them discriminated against. We need good quality people like that.
We even had a 2-star general sign it, but that was not good enough.
That's right.
Let's take a break. We'll have more right after this.
GQ, once Gentleman's Quarterly, was launched in 1931 as a magazine of fashion, style, and culture. Men looked to it for advice on grooming, gadgets, and apparel. The current version delves into current events and culture, but the magazine has, perhaps, overstepped its mission statement in the April issue, with an opinion article from the publication's editors titled, 21 Books You Don't Have to Read. Number 12 on the list is the Holy Bible. GQ's editors have a strange way of backing up their condescending assessment. They write, the Holy Bible is rated very highly by all the people who supposedly live by it, but who in actuality have not read it. Those who have read it know there are some good parts, but overall it is certainly not the finest thing that man has ever produced. It is repetitive, self-contradictory, sententious, foolish, and even at times ill-intentioned. That word foolish is striking. Michael Rate at townhall.com points to a Bible verse, 1 Corinthians 1:18. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. The Bible is also rated highly by people who have read it, and who do read it, are shaped by it, inspired by it, convicted by it, comforted by it, and love it. The whole exercise by GQ in labeling the Bible in several classics as not worth your time strikes me as arrogant and certainly promotes cultural illiteracy. What the editors of GQ may not know is that the entire Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, is about Jesus Christ. Evangelist Franklin Graham suggests on Facebook that they read it again, because one day every knee will bow and every tongue confess that he is Lord. Lots of Christians agree with a guy named Brian Houston who tweeted that the Bible is way more hip than GQ. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Penna Dexter does a commentary, and you will have a chance to receive it in your inbox if you sign up tomorrow. And it's one that we've just played right now for those of you listening online. It has to do with the editors at GQ who actually put together 21 books you don't have to read. And again, maybe I'd agree with one or two of those. You know, a lot of people don't like Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn because it reminds you too much of what it was like in slavery, or Lord of the Rings. How did that end up there? But the one that's really the stumper of all is the Bible. Maybe the Bible has some good parts, but overall it's certainly not the finest thing that man has ever produced. It's repetitive, self-contradictory, foolish and even at times ill-intentioned. Penna, your commentary is a reminder that maybe GQ that was started in 1957 is going to be long gone. Bible's been around for millennia. It will be around after GQ is gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's a compliment to say, you look like you just stepped out of GQ. Sometimes you guys both do. But GQ took it to a different level, I think, in this April issue when they decided they're going to weigh in on the books that people should read or people could maybe have had to read and should not need to read. They brought in a whole new list of replacement books. And so number 12 on the list of books you don't need to read is the Holy Bible. And I mean, it just struck me as very condescending because, first of all, they talk about it's not the best book that man has ever written. And really, those of us that know, we really understand that this book was, in a sense, inspired by the Holy Spirit and that it's God's book. And it's the other thing I don't think they realize is that it's actually from beginning to end, even the Old Testament is all about Christ. So it's an important book and it tells a story. And if they don't like it, that does not mean that it doesn't make you culturally literate to read it. And that was one of even if you didn't read it for spiritual reasons, we've argued before for classes in public schools about the Bible, just simply for cultural literacy, because there's so many, there's so much terminology out there that comes out of the Bible and phrasing. But it was basically a very, I thought, a slap in the face, again, to people who might be GQ fans, but who also are Christians. They go to a church. They read the Bible, or their church at least talks about the Bible a little bit. And so I wanted to kind of bring this up. And I think that the best tweet on this was this guy named Brian Houston. He said, the Bible is way more hip than GQ.
That's pretty amazing. Kelly, you sort of wonder, were they just sitting around here saying, 12 books that we shouldn't, I'll make it 21. Okay. Oh, well, we got to put the Bible on there. That won't be controversial. I'm thinking they did it intentionally to be controversial. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, it's, the first thing you think of is just the arrogance. First they're saying God's word is, then use the words they use.
Overrated.
Yeah,
Sentius.
Yeah, and intentional and like misintentional or whatever. I mean, it just, there are all these words that are really condescending to God's word. I'm just like, gosh, that's just the foolishness.
Yes.
Which is, takes you back to Corinthians and them seeing the wise of the world, seeing the thinking that it's foolish, the things of God are foolish. Mm-hmm. But I just think it's also incredibly arrogant because, this is the most read book of all times. This is something that, many, many people of many, many different, ages and walks of life all think is the greatest book ever written. And I don't know, it's just incredibly arrogant for GQ, which, by the way, is known as the highest levels of intellectualism.
Yeah, do I really care?
I
know.
It's just so odd that they would even dare go there. Anyway, so it certainly stood out. They got a lot of attention, although I don't know if that's exactly the kind of attention they wanted, but they definitely got a lot of attention.
And I wonder if they're just doing that. You think of New Yorker and that screed against Chick-fil-A. New Yorker's kind of fading, and it's like, we got some attention because we said so many nasty things about Chick-fil-A. GQ isn't doing very well either as a publication. Maybe I thought, maybe we'll get some attention, not the kind that maybe they want, by listing the Bible as one of the 21 books you don't have to read. I don't know.
What struck me as I was putting this together was thinking about all the seminaries we have that are, those are establishments and organizations that are built on teaching people the Bible and how to apply the Bible and how to teach others the Bible. And, so to say that this is not a worthy book, again, it just shows the arrogance of these folks, and it kind of shows their cluelessness. They're clueless.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons we do some of these things about defending the Bible is even this weekend when I was speaking in an open forum Saturday night before I spoke in a church and did both services Sunday morning, they gave us questions, and people could write them out. And one of the questions I had missed because I was going through them real quickly, and they were on North Korea and Syria, and they were on, intelligent design and everything you can possibly imagine. But one of them, which I found later, I wish I'd had it at the time, hasn't science disproven God, and hasn't science and history disproven the Bible? Now, our GQ friends probably sort of see this as nothing more than the work of human beings. And so in some respects, this is why we certainly like to cover some of this on Point of View, because I think we're going to move more and more into a time in which, as we've just seen, there's more hostility to Christianity, but also more ignorance about what the Bible is. And a lot of people reject what they've never read in the first place, don't you think?
I think so. I think that's probably true. People have a view of the Bible, and they've never even read it. You know, it was interesting. You mentioned your experience over the weekend. I went to a wedding, and this was, I have never, ever been to a ceremony where there was no mention of God at all in a wedding ceremony. But this one, they had actually a readings out of one of the books that GQ recommends to replace their list is The Alchemist. It's a novel.
Wow.
I've never read it, but a lot of people like it. And so they had people reading out of that at the ceremony, but they never said a word about, marriage being God's idea, or let's, have any kind of blessing or prayer or anything. And the couple even walked down the aisle to Jimi Hendrix. So, I mean, we do live in a world where there's this utter pure rejection of God in some quarters, and I guess we shouldn't be surprised. It's a spiritual thing, and the father of lies, Satan, is very, applauding this and certainly causing this to happen in many ways. But we had a Christian consensus only a generation ago in this country, and it's really gone.
Well, we need to take a break, but when we come back, I want to get into a little bit more of that. I'd love to get your comments about this. But I think you had told us off air that here you're at a wedding ceremony and they don't mention the word marriage.
Yeah, it was the speeches of the wedding party.
Yeah.
They were from another part of the country, not Texas, even though I was in Texas. And they didn't ever mention... they talked about the partner, and I think that's the LGBT
your
agenda that's seeping in because you don't want to mention the words husband, wife, and marriage.
It's just amazing. Well, we have a lot more to cover in the second hour here, and one of the other religious liberty cases, which we'll talk about with Kelly Shackelford, is one of the other articles we've posted. Livingston Christian Schools, want to talk about that and what that might mean to your church and your school and those kinds of issues. Of course, we had the National Day of Prayer. Haven't said a word about the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and we do have a piece by Cal Thomas, The Vulgar Goes Mainstream, so we may get into that in a little bit more detail. Also, a real controversy about a young woman that decided to wear a dress that was seen as Asian, and that's culture appropriation, and that's a no-no. Not to mention the Iran deal. We got a lot more to cover. We will do that. And if you'd like to read some of the articles we've already posted on the website, they're all available at pointofview.net. Stay tuned. We have a lot more to cover. We will right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Last hour, we spent some time talking about one or two of the religious liberty cases. We're going to get into a few others. Also talked about the Democrats' God gap. Also talked about whether the Bible is boring and how, in some respects, sexual minorities are supported because of people being sort of anti-Christian. We're going to get into the White House Correspondents' Dinner, cultural appropriation, and a number of other topics. But Kelly Shackelford, I wanted to come back to you and talk about one of the cases that is disappointing. I recognize the Supreme Court turns down many more cases than they accept, maybe 60 or 70, maybe 80 in a year. So we shouldn't be totally disappointed, but still I was discouraged because this has to do with the Livingston Christian schools. And the precedent is one that if we are concerned about churches and Christian schools, we should make sure that zoning laws don't prevent them from actually being able to locate in a particular community.
Yeah, this is a case, the Livingston Christian School, about a school that wanted to exist, and they thought the natural place to exist would be within a church, and they were denied, and they said, okay, well, where can we have our Christian school? And the answer was, well, there's nowhere in the city limits that you can have a Christian school as a matter of right. And so this is a big issue. We think that's unconstitutional. There has to be somewhere that the city, that the Christian school can exist within the city. There's actually a Supreme Court case about strip clubs, and that you can't have a city that has zoning laws that says that there has to be somewhere that they can exist as a matter of right. Because, the court knows that they're disfavored and all this. And so our argument essentially is a little bit like all the Christian school wants is to at least be as much protected as the strip club. But that, the court did not take it. It doesn't mean they ruled on it. They just didn't take it. And so we have the Sixth Circuit opinion, which is, I think, a very poor decision that's now remaining in place. I think the Christian school might still be able to work this out. They're talking to the city, and that might have been why the court didn't take it, that the city was trying to work it out, and that could moot the case. But this is a really important issue, and it's one that, it was going to have to be eventually decided by the Supreme Court. And the reason you don't have cities where there's nowhere that the church can exist, or there's nowhere that the Christian school can exist as a matter of right, is it makes it very difficult. You have to get special permission. A lot of times you have to jump through very expensive hoops, which a lot of schools or churches or whatever couldn't afford to do. And so it's a way to sort of push those and really make sure that they can't exist in the city limits. And there are reasons why cities would like to do that, because these are tax-exempt organizations. So, they're not going to pay taxes. I think I'll not allow them here. I'd rather have somebody paying taxes. So, really important issue, and one that I think people need to pay attention to.
I'm thinking of some other cases, because the name of this one church sticks out. It was called Opulent Life.
Yep.
Was it in Mississippi or in the South somewhere?
We won that case at the Federal Court of Appeals. A really significant decision protecting the rights of churches from these types of zoning laws where they push the churches out of the community. So, but this issue of can you have a zoning law in a city that essentially doesn't allow Christian schools anywhere in the city as a matter of right. Is that okay? That hasn't been decided directly by the court, and so that's one we know that is going to have to be dealt with. I mean, we're dealing with this, and another one that we had to file this week. And people can see all the legal documents, everything on all these.
We got some of the links, and of course we have links to First Liberty. Go ahead.
Yeah, at firstliberty.org they can find all this. But the Taurus Hayim case, which is this is a Jewish synagogue that simply wants to exist, and they have. And first they were sued by some neighbors that wanted to get rid of the Jewish synagogue. We won that case. And then the city of Dallas came after them. We were like, you got to be kidding me. And they've jumped through every hoop, done everything they've asked them. There's only one thing they can't do, and that's provide enough parking spaces. And again, I just want people to think about this. This is an Orthodox Jewish synagogue. They don't drive. They walk. And the idea that you got to force them to do a bunch of parking spaces, or there's not enough room for enough parking spaces, and therefore we're going to shut down their synagogue, is just crazy. But that's where we are now. And, look, this is really serious. Because these are Orthodox Jews, I mean, if their synagogue is shuttered, they all have to move. I mean, they can't drive to synagogue, and they have to go to synagogue, so they would have to find somewhere to move where they could be near another synagogue, because theirs would be shut down because it doesn't have enough parking spaces when people don't drive there. So it's an example of how incredibly burdensome this can be on churches and religious organizations that simply want to exist.
Again, this makes a case for things like the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, or the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Some of these acts were done in large part because we needed remedies for the kind of abuse that was taking place with zoning in one case, or with other kinds of discrimination in other cases, right?
Yeah, that's why we have a federal law, our LUPA, and it's a shame we have to have it, but we have to have it, because if not, the Congress was finding that cities and jurisdictions were saying, oh, well, we'll just not allow any of these churches or religious groups or whatever, because that's good tax-paying property that we could have somebody else do, and so they made it difficult and, in fact, impossible. And that's why the federal law was passed to protect them against zoning discrimination and being wiped out of communities.
Let's talk about First Liberty for just a minute, because right now there probably is somebody listening saying, I've had trouble with zoning laws in my community, either our church, our Christian school. Maybe we wanted to expand our church, or they, in one way or another, we're running afoul of these bureaucrats who are just maybe trying to push us out of existence. Can they go and get some consultation from you?
Yeah, they can call or they can go online. You can fill out the information, and our attorneys look through things and see everything we can do to help, if possible. But it's firstliberty.org, or they can call the phone number there, which is 972-941-4444, and get help, 972-941-4444. But the point is, that's why First Liberty exists, is to provide people protection, whether it's their kid being told they can't pray over their lunch meal, which is an actual case, whether it's a little boy being told he can't bring his Bible to free reading time at school, one of our cases, whether it's somebody in the military, like we talked about with Chaplain Squires, who's being told he can't follow his Southern Baptist faith in his marriage counseling, which is a violation of the law. Any of these cases, you name the issue, whether it's on behalf of a church or behalf of an individual or whatever, it's religious freedom, and we do that free of charge.
I thought when we come back, maybe you can give us an update on all of those cases, because one of the cases we were encouraging people to pray about was living in Christian schools, but got a couple others. So we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A
Economist Thomas Sowell filed his last column a little over a week ago. At the age of 86, he certainly has earned his retirement. We'll miss his insight, but benefit from his books and columns he has written over the years. One of his last few columns had the engaging title, Football and Fallacies. As is so often the case, he takes on one of the fallacies of the liberal left. He talks about the reaction from players in the NFL when a black punter took the field. One of the defenders cried, "Fake." His reaction was understandable since you never see a black kicker in the NFL. So Thomas Sowell put it this way: I've seen hundreds of black players score touchdowns, but not one kick a point afterwards. I've seen a black president of the United States before I've even seen a black kicker in the NFL. The point he is making is that politicians and judges have always assumed that statistical differences between racial groups indicate discrimination. If so, does that mean there is discrimination among kickers in professional football? Of course, we all know the answer to that question. Owners and coaches will pick the best player regardless of their ethnic background. In fact, they'll even take a foreign player who cannot even speak English if they can kick a football. The lesson here is that we have been told for decades that statistical differences are automatically a reason to suspect discrimination, whether between races or sexes. He goes on to remind us that some of the differences, for example, in wages between men and women have more to do with their different career choices. So let's be honest. Some statistical differences do point to discrimination, either overt or subtle. But in most cases, the differences are due to other factors that have nothing to do with discrimination. This is a lesson I hope politicians and judges can learn from this football story. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, Weekend Edition. And don't forget, we also are broadcasting live on Facebook Live. You can leave a comment there as well. A couple of points I thought I might make. Last week, we were privileged to have Lathan Watson here and his piece on why the left is wrong about Thomas Jefferson's wall of separation between church and state. Very well done. And right next to it, first-round picks, First Liberty attorneys named top football cases of 2018. Those are kind of fun. But in there, Kelly, you have a wonderful list of really prayer targets. And I've suggested before that, first of all, everybody should support First Liberty. But number two, sign up to get your email, because even though the Livingston Christian School case didn't go to the Supreme Court, you're still waiting on some of the others, aren't you?
Yeah, we actually had a record this year, which is, normally the most we ever had on the way to the Supreme Court at any one time is 1. And this year we have 6. And so in addition to Livingston, which we talked about, we've got the Coach Joe Kennedy case, which is a coach who was fired for going to a knee to say a silent prayer after the football game. We've got the Bladensburg Veterans Memorial Cross case. This is a 100-year-old Veterans Memorial that is currently being declared all of a sudden now unconstitutional. And by the way, the Court of Appeals that did that within its jurisdiction is Arlington. So if that precedent is not overturned, they would have to go into Arlington and begin tearing down the large freestanding crosses in Arlington.
Wow.
There's the Marianne Sauce case, which is the woman who was actually told by police she wasn't allowed to pray in her own home, and the question is whether that's unconstitutional. There's the and then there's 2 county commissioners cases, both cases the same thing, county commissioners who open their meetings with prayer. And one case, en banc, before 15 federal judges went one way, one case en banc before a different 15 federal judges went the other way. So those are both on their way to the Supreme Court and likely to be taken because you can't have the law change across state line to state line to state line. So those are all big cases sitting there or on their way there. I'd encourage people to really be praying about those because any of those will obviously affect millions of people and really make a big difference on religious freedom for our future. So those are the ones at the top. There's also other ones, and one of the ones that is on it's at the Court of Appeals now, but that to me is just so ironic, is the Cambridge Christian School case. It was kind of out of the area where you were in the Tampa area. Mm-hmm. And this is two private Christian schools that were in the state championship of football, and the state of Florida refused to allow them to have a prayer, and which is unbelievable, and even more so when you realize that this same stadium is where Billy Graham held one of his first major revivals. So you look at how far we've fallen as a country where Billy Graham held a revival there, and now you got the Florida State Athletic Association saying, oh, no, we're not going to let you two Christian schools have a prayer before your game. All cases that, but there's lots more, but those are the ones at the high levels that people can watch, be praying about.
Yes. So again, just a number of very important cases. Again, Constitution 101, it takes 4 justices to take a case, 5 to win. And so in the case of the earlier one that we mentioned, the Livingston Christian School case, didn't have 4 justices, but again, it may have to do with the fact that maybe it'll be resolved. But I just hate to have that precedent out there, don't you? It just seems to suggest that you can zone churches or Christian schools out of any jurisdiction. That's not a good thing, right?
Yeah. Hopefully there's another very strong case that can get to the Supreme Court and settle this once and for all.
Yes. One of the articles that we have posted is Penna Dexter's commentary on the GQ list, and I haven't been very good at taking phone calls, so let me take one of those here. I think you wanted to speak to that GQ list. So, Alton in South Carolina, thank you for joining us today.
How you doing? I enjoy your program, and I'm thankful for the information we get. We not get off of fake news, so I wanted to comment about Mark Twain. I got 2 of his books, and I love them, and I don't see nothing wrong with them.
The argument always is that they use some words, from, the antebellum world and things like that, but that's reality, right?
Yeah, sure. Them some good books. Everybody ought to have one of them.
Well, and again, whether it's reading Mark Twain, whether it's reading the Bible, I still couldn't believe the list, Penna. Of course, the Bible is the one that got our attention, but even Lord of the Rings and some of these were
Ernest Hemingway, some of his.
Yeah, just it's that's almost like historical revisionism, Alton, don't you think?
I think so. These people need to get over all this crap. I mean, it's foolish. These little thing upsets them.
Yeah, I know.
These little thing, they need to get over that.
Well, we're going to talk about that in just a minute when we talk about this idea of cultural appropriation. Maybe I'll get into it right now because that'll be a good illustration. And if you haven't seen this story, this is something that David French has written about, Jonah Goldberg, and it has to do with this real sweet girl. If you haven't seen it, it's a picture of her wearing a prom dress, and it's got Asian flowers on it, and so it looks Asian. And so far, so good. But then, as soon as it went out there, some people that have an outrage over just about anything were saying that this is cultural appropriation. Okay, let's understand that cultural appropriation used to be a descriptive title. That is, sometimes you will culturally appropriate something. And Jonah Goldberg makes some great illustrations there. If you think about this over time, we've had majority culture sometimes borrows or adapts something from a minority culture, a custom, a fashion, a cuisine, or something of that nature. He even says, if you think about this, American blacks would never have picked up European musical instruments to create blues and jazz. Without cultural appropriation, white and black artists might never have created rock and roll. And you can go on and on and on. You can think about even Chinese restaurants and all sorts of things where there has been cultural appropriation. Well, political correctness has struck, Penna, and now it's gone from being descriptive to proscriptive. That is, you can't do anything that might look Asian unless you're Asian. And this poor girl has been pilloried simply because she saw a dress that she thought really looked very nice. And because it was Asian, that was enough for her to just, receive. And I can't even, unfortunately, say some of the words. They were just as bad as some of the things were said to Aaron and Melissa Klein in some of that. But it's just an illustration, again, as Alton was talking about just a minute ago, some of these people just need to get over some of this, don't you think?
Why would you not be flattered if you were Asian and people decided to adopt your style? And it is beautiful, and I'm not going to be surprised, especially given the influence of China in business. I mean, they'll be influential in fashion, too. Just mark my words.
Well, and again, since Alton got us started on this, and we'll go back to some others in just a minute, David French puts his tongue in his cheek rather strongly here and says, well, then here are the kind of questions we need to ask. Dear Commissioner of Social Justice, I'm hosting a weekend party and wanted to serve Mexican food and show off pictures from my vacation in Cancun. Can I get guidance on appropriately respectful methods of preparation and decor? Dear Commissioner of Social Justice, to follow up on my earlier request, can you also review my clothing purchases in Cancun? I tried to strike a balance between Mexican and European influences, but given the toxic European influence on Mexico, I fear that my efforts may have been infected by my unconscious cultural imperialism. Your counsel is deeply appreciated. He goes on and on and on, and it's really gotten a little bit crazy, hasn't it?
It has. I didn't understand this story at first. I mean, are they saying that this dress is a particular dress that is like
only for Chinese, only for Asians?
That this dress, or is it that is an Asian-looking dress in particular? Is it? I just didn't know. I thought, is this dress like a one that you wear at a specific type of thing, and she accidentally, came, or is it just that it's an Asian-looking dress? And if it is, then I'm like, well, that's crazy. I mean, the idea that you can't wear, styles from other countries, and again, the sad thing is that the guy who attacked her got so many, likes and all this. Yeah. And what's also fascinating to me is that, Facebook doesn't block that. But if it was something that was Christian or, on the conservative side, I mean, there's all kinds of blocking going on that, there's stories this week even on that. So it's amazing that this even happened. Here's a girl. I think what the outrageous thing she did is she posted a few pictures of herself and said prom.
Yeah.
That's it. And all of a sudden she's like murdered somebody as far as these people are concerned. And again, I think the ultimate issue here is we've got a culture that is so everybody's offended.
Yes.
And it's like, get over it. We need to stop having everybody being offended. If you got something to say, say it. Say, I have a concern here and I want to express it to you. That's the way we used to do things until the social media took over.
There are some things you can be offended by, and the White House Correspondents' Dinner might be one of those. We'll talk about that right after this.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, Weekend Edition, and Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. The third article we've posted here is one that you might want to read by our friend Cal Thomas. He entitles it, "The Vulgar Goes Mainstream." And he says, to be vulgar once earned societal disapproval, ostracism from polite company, and in my grandmother's era, put a young person in danger of having his mouth washed out with soap. But now, as he says, vulgarities are now mainstream. And a good example of that, Penna Dexter, is the White House Correspondents' Dinner this week. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, from profanity to female genitalia to horrible, rude, mean girl insults. That's what, it's just amazing that this was in a Washington, D.C. gala event. Not really amazing. And I wasn't surprised that both last year and this year, President Trump didn't show up. I mean, you don't expect him to, but a lot of his staff, especially media staff, did. And it started out, this White House Correspondents' Dinner started out as members of the press gathering to try to sort of open up the lines of communication with the media, and to be a roast, but in good humor and tasteful to some degree. It has just gone off the reservation, and a lot of people are calling for them to just end this because it was so ridiculously bad. This Michelle Wolf, who I'd never heard of before, but, that doesn't mean anything. But she's with Comedy Central, and she was lewd and rude. And I think especially her comments that she made about both Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the press secretary, and also, she wanted a tree to fall on Kellyanne Conway. And, they are such cool people that they handled themselves with decorum, with stoicism in a sense, and dignity, that I think this ends up backfiring on the left and showing, these women especially in a very good light. And but I don't like hearing profanity in public like that when it's televised, and just the crudeness and the rudeness was unbelievable. And I think Cal Thomas is right in pointing this out. I would love to see us turn back to having some manners. You remember when William Wilberforce, he defeated the slave trade, and it took him 20 years to do it in Britain. And his other quest was to reform the manners. Mm-hmm. And we need something like that here in this country. We're losing it.
Mm. Yeah, it was really disgraceful. And I think the worst parts were when somebody is at the head table and they get up and then disparage someone at the head table. That's pretty. That's just so beyond the pale. And so I think what she did, especially with Kellyanne Conway and with Sarah Huckabee Sanders, was really bad. And the thing that I was encouraged by a little bit was that everyone, I say everyone, probably not everyone, but certainly a lot of the liberal media spoke up and said they felt this was inappropriate too. I like to see things when they go across the aisles and people recognize this is wrong. And that did happen. And I think that's at least a good sign that not everybody has totally lost it. And that we do have some people that understand some boundaries to how we should treat each other. So that's about the only good thing came out of it. Otherwise, I think everybody that spoke publicly that I can think of, said this was wrong and over the line.
Even Cal Thomas points this out in the article that is posted at pointofview.net, that the head or the president of the Correspondents Association, her name is Margaret Talev. She issued a statement. Last night's program was meant to offer a unifying message about our common commitment to a vigorous and free press, et cetera, et cetera. She said, unfortunately, the entertainer's monologue was not in the spirit of that mission, but this entertainer is, I mean, they should have done their research if they were surprised by her, because that's what she does. That's her shtick. And Star Parker wrote about it. She said there's no humor in this year's Correspondents' Dinner. What was pre-funded or previewed to be humor was politicized vulgarity and hate.
That's the thing, statement. Yeah. I mean, look, I have watched those in the past, and even when they've skewered my side, they've still been, it's been in good humor. Mm-hmm. It's been something I would laugh at. We could all laugh at. I mean, I think in the past there's been some excellent just treatments of how they've done that, to where really it is funny, and they take a little bit of the truth and then make fun. This wasn't like that. When you watched what she was saying, it wasn't even funny. It was just kind of mean.
Just mean.
Yeah.
It's mean girl, as Penna called it. It's a mean girl stuff.
And it's sad. It's sad that happened. I don't know what they did in the past. I think they did this as a fundraiser for some good causes.
It still is.
Yeah. That's a shame, too, because then whatever that, assuming it's a good cause, those causes get hurt by that kind of thing as well.
And that's what I wanted to broaden it for just a minute, because, first of all, not everybody was upset by this. There were some that doubled down, not the least of which is Michelle Wolf herself. But Stephen Colbert doubled down and, these people need to, he came, again, I can't say some things he said about this on the air, but, there is a sense in which, and this is the broader issue, comedy isn't being funny anymore. Almost everybody expects somewhere along the line that there's going to be a little bit of an edge to some of the late night talk shows, but some of them are so edgy now and so angry as to cease being funny. And this, I think, is a preview of future White House Correspondents' Dinners. What are the chances, as in slim and none, that anybody in the Trump administration is going to come to the next one?
Well, they're not. And what you're describing, it worries me a little bit about our country. Are we drifting into sort of a violent culture? I mean, you think of Rome, and what you're describing now, it's almost like a bloodlust. It's like comedy or entertainment is not somebody being clever or saying something. It's instead, I want you to attack someone. I want you to, it's almost like watching the Gladiators or something, or watching people, you just wonder, is our culture being so devalued, and our manners, and like we talked about, being thrown aside, that we're drifting into something that none of us want to drift into.
And is just the female in the room, having a female comedian be so vulgar. Mm-hmm. I mean, just putting aside the meanness, but the vulgarity that, Cal Thomas majors a lot on that this, it's just, society always flinches, or has flinched at that and blushed. And we've lost the ability to blush and be embarrassed in a way. And so, even though I'm used to hearing entertainers use that kind of language, it's now so, because we have so many different television networks now that are not regulated as far as what language you can use, you just hear it. And, a lot of people, they aren't even affected by it anymore. And I think that's very, very sad for the country.
Again, if we can talk about what it used to be, Bob Hope making jokes about the president, or Johnny Carson, you never really knew whether he was liberal or conservative or Republican or a Democrat, and it really didn't matter because he didn't delve into the political stuff that much. Now, there are certain programs at night you don't even want to watch because it's just basically MSNBC. It's, basically CNN, or, well, worse. I mean, I really can't come up with something where you just know they're going to just take off on whoever it might be. And it might not just be Donald Trump. I mean, what finally caused me to stop watching is the kinds of almost Saturday Night Live lampooning of people like, for example, our Secretary of Education or our Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and things that you wouldn't have ever expected from a late night talk show. And that's exactly the kind of skits that are being put on today.
Here's what I loved about it. Sarah Sanders, who, people were saying, you should have walked out, you should be mad. Instead, she said, it didn't really bother me. I feel bad for her. I'm just praying for her.
Yes, wasn't that incredible?
That was a beautiful response.
Now, that's a class act. If you want to see a class act, that's the case. And she was on the other day just saying, I'm praying for her, and everybody was so supportive of her. She, as she was reading through the tweet, said, I was just crying because I did not realize how many people support me. You talk about the toughest job in America right now.
She's got it.
I think she's got that. So anyway, just thought we'd spend just a moment or two talking about that. But let's hope that the White House Correspondents' Dinner is not a preview of the next National Prayer Breakfast or something like this. But we'll see. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
GQ, once Gentleman's Quarterly, was launched in 1931 as a magazine of fashion, style, and culture. Men looked to it for advice on grooming, gadgets, and apparel. The current version delves into current events and culture, but the magazine has, perhaps, overstepped its mission statement in the April issue, with an opinion article from the publication's editors titled, 21 Books You Don't Have to Read. Number 12 on the list is the Holy Bible. GQ's editors have a strange way of backing up their condescending assessment. They write, the Holy Bible is rated very highly by all the people who supposedly live by it, but who in actuality have not read it. Those who have read it know there are some good parts, but overall it is certainly not the finest thing that man has ever produced. It is repetitive, self-contradictory, sententious, foolish, and even at times ill-intentioned. That word foolish is striking. Micah Rate at townhall.com points to a Bible verse, 1 Corinthians 1:18. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. The Bible is also rated highly by people who have read it, and who do read it, are shaped by it, inspired by it, convicted by it, comforted by it, and love it. The whole exercise by GQ in labeling the Bible in several classics as not worth your time strikes me as arrogant and certainly promotes cultural illiteracy. What the editors of GQ may not know is that the entire Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, is about Jesus Christ. Evangelist Franklin Graham suggests on Facebook that they read it again, because one day every knee will bow and every tongue confess that he is Lord. Lots of Christians agree with a guy named Brian Houston who tweeted that the Bible is way more hip than GQ. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. As we wind down today, I thought I'd just mention that just a few miles from where we're broadcasting right now is the National Rifle Association Convention. It's an annual convention. And, of course, today the President, Donald Trump, and the Vice President, Mike Pence, both spoke. And they expect about 80,000 NRA members to actually go through the convention center. As a matter of fact, I plan to go there tomorrow. A friend and I are going to walk through at least the exhibition hall. They say there's Penna Dexter 15 acres of exhibits, so I'm going to have my walking shoes on. But this is also a place where, of course, we have some protests, and I guess that is to be expected. But again, pretty amazing to have both the president and vice president speaking at the NRA convention today.
Yes, I do remember, especially when the Parkland, Florida shooting happened, that the NRA, of course, became public enemy number one to a lot of people. And there was a lot of talk in Dallas about the fact that we were having it here in our city.
Right.
A lot of protesting. I'm sure a lot of that influence is there in the protests. But the number of people that are there supporting Second Amendment rights and just the gun enthusiasts and all of that is pretty overwhelming. I've never heard of a convention that big. I mean, do that many people go to our political conventions? That's a lot of people.
It's pretty amazing. If nothing else.
Have fun, Kerby. Enjoy yourself.
And again, there were a lot of people that were in the more liberal side of the city council and others that were saying they wanted to prevent it from taking place in Dallas. But it happened yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And there are all sorts of events, speaking engagements, prayer rallies, various addresses. But, Kelly, if nothing else, just pretty amazing that both the president and the vice president came to the NRA convention, as you said before. That used to be thought as the kiss of death. They would certainly be making decisions on the basis of political calculus, and they assume that being at the NRA convention's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing for some of their voters.
Yeah, I think that's a message to all the representatives, congressmen and senators out there, that's probably true. Now, I'm not saying it's true in every district. Obviously, there's some very more liberal districts that are more anti-NRA, but I think certainly across the country, most people, like the idea of self-defense. They own firearms. They see the NRA in a way where it's actually advantageous for you to take those pro-Second Amendment positions. And so that's why you see the two leading politicians in our country right now going to speak to this event.
Again, NRA convention just down the road here, and we'll see what kind of coverage is taking place. Before we wind it down, though, I thought we'd talk about James Ho. We have mentioned his name before because, of course, you have worked with him, and I want to get some of your perspective on that. But he's actually issued his first judicial opinion. He now, of course, sits on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. This particular case had to do with a limit on political contributions, and actually he is issuing, in this case, a dissent. But as this particular article by Bradley Smith says, it was quite a barn burner. Right out of the barn, right out of the gate, whatever metaphor you want to use, he comes out standing up for the Constitution, doesn't he?
Yeah, I do think, a lot of people were focused on judges maybe for the election, and they focused a lot on Supreme Court. But I think a lot of point of view listeners probably, because it was the number one issue for evangelicals in the country were judges. And this is an example of the type of thing we're seeing. These judges that Trump is putting on the court, it's not that it's his political buddies or whatever like the past. He's kind of farmed this out and said, hey, Federal Society and all I want good judges, and I know this is really important to you. Why don't you help? And so, for instance, Jim Ho, I'll be honest, is a guy that we really pushed, thought he would be an excellent judge, and first opinion out of the chute is getting attention.
Yes.
Why? Because his very first sentence I think Penna wrote it down, but his very first sentence of the opinion, he comes out and essentially says, the problem in constitutional jurisprudence is that people are making up rights that are nowhere to be found in the Constitution, and they're failing to protect the rights that are actually written there. And what better way to start out your career as a judge than that? And what I loved is this article this is the Washington Examiner, I think it is.
Examiner
is saying, boy, this guy's a career to follow.
We got to watch him.
44 years old, clerk for Justice Thomas, young, bright, very strong on the Constitution. He's going to be there a long time, and he's going to make an impact. But what I loved is Slate.com, a more liberal perspective, also wrote an article on this because this scared them, this opinion. Yes. And they said, hey, did you see what he just said about rights not in the Constitution? Said, I think he's going to be against Roe v. Wade and against same-sex marriage. And I thought, what an incredible admission that he never talked about that. They just said, well, those aren't in the Constitution.
They just acknowledged it.
Yeah, they kind of acknowledged by accident that these are just things that people are making up because they're not in the Constitution. But anyway, it's just good to see And again, there's a lot of these judges going on to the courts. These are lifetime appointments. It's great to see one example already of a really bright, young, conservative who's following the Constitution, who's going to be the kind of judge we want as judges, not judges who are going to make things up or say, I want this or I want that. But no, my job is to follow the law and to already be getting attention right off the bat.
You're going to probably see, this points out the importance of getting the Trump-nominated judges confirmed. And you are going to see some ads in some various states. There's an ad campaign starts tomorrow.
That's true.
And it's good because there's been just so much slow walking of some of these judges and this 30-hour debate rule on people who are not controversial. So there's an ad buy, about $1 million of ads, and probably be in some key states where the senators, need some pushing. And so you'll see that. And so pray for that, because really this is now or never, especially if their election results aren't great in November, that we've got to get people on the courts who are going to protect the Constitution. This Jim Ho was vocal about it. And it's, right out of the box. He wasn't shy. A lot of times this article in the Examiner points out that a lot of times they sort of ramp up to being outspoken, but no, in his dissent, he was outspoken about protecting the Constitution.
And the thing is, as Penna is pointing out, in addition to people like Jim Ho and a number of other really good people that have already been confirmed onto the court for life, there are 70 federal judicial appointments by the president waiting to be voted on. And so it's just this slowdown, this attempt to...
Yes.
They would all be voted through. I don't think there's any of those 70 that are not going to get through. It's just a matter of them slowing down. I would encourage everybody, call your senator and say, I want these judges voted through. Mitch McConnell ultimately is kind of, the guy that can really make this happen. And he's begun over the past 2 weeks. I think he's feeling the pressure. He's begun to speak out and say, this is my number one, priority. But I think people need to call their senators, call your two senators and say, I want these judges. Trump is appointing great judges. Let's get these people voted on this year.
Yes. And again, write down the name James C. Ho, H-O.
Look out for this guy.
Born in Taiwan, went to Stanford and University of Chicago Law School. We talked about, of course, who he clerked for, Clarence Thomas. And I love how it ends. This could be a fun career to watch. We don't have an Asian American on the Supreme Court. He's 45 years of age. After about a year or two, do you think Donald Trump might be interested in him?
He could be a really good one.
It might be a name we hear again.
And I'm not just saying that because he was one of our volunteer attorneys at First Liberty. This is a really talented, very bright guy who's going to never flinch from doing the right thing and following the Constitution and the laws of our country.
Again, we have covered quite a bit in the last couple of hours. So, again, if you found yourself wanting to hear it again, of course, you can download that in your podcast. Of course, you can watch it as well. It's all available at our website, pointofview.net. Of course, we have a link to First Liberty in those cases. Have a great weekend. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.